Good morning to everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Massimo Colombo, and I'm just a very simple task. It's just to welcome all of you and to describe briefly what will be going on in today and tomorrow. First of all, I have to, in principle, our director was supposed to welcome all of you, but unfortunately, because of a COVID emergency, he could not come at 10 o'clock, so I'm just replacing him. And this is an inaugural event of BEF, so I would like just very simply to describe what BEF is. BEF is the Italian name for Bureau of Entrepreneurial Finance, and it's a joint research center which have been created by Politecnico di Torino and Politecnico di Milano. And well, the reason is quite simple. We were working together and taking fun in working together since I don't know, since prehistory, since the Iron Age. And so we decided that it was a good idea to formalize in a way our collaboration and to open it to every scholar in Italy and abroad who is interested in entrepreneurial finance. And in this way, we also thought that we could have a critical mass and be more influential on society and the practices. And because all of us share the idea that when practices are based on solid scientific results, generally you get better practices, right? This is our idea. And today is an inaugural event, and I would like just to, before explaining what is going on, to mention two persons which are not here, but which I think have been very important for this initiative. One is Francesco Brioschi, who is a finance scholar now retired, but which was basically the guy who started finance at Politecnico di Milano, and to some extent also at Politecnico di Torino, because some of our colleagues in Turin were imprinted by Francesco, and the second one is Mike Wright, which all of you know, and he has been very fundamental for most of us in encouraging our research, and he would have been probably very happy to be with us, and unfortunately he cannot. Well, today the morning is after I will give the floor to Laura, and then we will have a presentation of the first study which BEF has been doing on investment practices and the COVID, and then we will have a keynote speech by Helmut Kraemer-Eis. Thank you, Helmut, for being here. And the Helmut speech will be followed by a round table. Then we will get some lunch and get a bus to go to the lake for the continuation of our event. I think this is all what I have to say, so I give the floor to Laura. Please, Laura.
Okay, and I am here in a double role of a member of BEF, but also of a deputy director of the Department of Managerial Engineering in Torino, and who is the co-venture in this initiative. And so on behalf of the director of our department, I would like to welcome you all to this event. And also to thank you for participating to this event, which will study and present research on a very, very important topic, such as entrepreneurial finance, which is considered very, very important also by Politecnico di Torino. Politecnico di Torino has been very keen on the promotion of innovative startup, and actually we have an excellence incubator, I3P, which was funded by Politecnico Torino, and who has also received an important award in 2019 and 2020. So if not possibly from the research point of view, actually Politecnico di Torino is very, very much involved in startup activities and funding and promoting. That's why I'm very, very proud to be here and to participate to this event, and to give to everybody welcome, and also in the hope that this initiative will continue in the future, and that we can every year meet here to tell each other our research results in this field. Thank you very much, and enjoy the event.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. As co-director of the Bureau of Entrepreneurial Finance, together with Professor Annalisa Croce, it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today. As said, our institute produces scholarly work, scholarly research addressing both society, policy, and academic needs. And we are here to present a report, a first, I would say, practice-oriented product that we have prepared in order to create a bridge between academics and practitioners. The report is about the impact of COVID-19 on the venture capital industry, in particular on the venture capital investment process. So, as you know, the sudden arrival of COVID has dramatically affected many facets of the global economy. And many commentators have worried about the fact that this shock might shock off the entire venture capital industry and venture capital flows. So in this report, we are exploring the impact of COVID on the venture capital industry investment practices by surveying more than 500 active venture capitalists in both Europe and outside Europe. We actually designed a survey made of 3 sections. In the first section, we included personal information about the respondent, and we also asked the respondents to self-identify themselves as venture capitalists. Then we included an additional section with questions about the type of venture capital the respondent was working for. And finally, we included a good amount of questions about the impact of COVID on the venture capital industry. We focused on the different phases of the deal funnel in order to learn how venture capitalists take decisions and change their investment practices after the pandemic. We started from data derived from a commercial data set, which is called Prequin. So we collected data on nearly 4,000 venture capital firms with at least one personal email contact, so one available and functioning email contact. We sent about 25,000 emails, and we actually collected more than 500 responses, obtaining a response rate of 13% at firm level. So in terms of the profiles of our respondents, in this slide we illustrate the geographic distribution of the respondents. As you can see, 45% of them are from Europe, 29% from US and Canada, and 16% from Asia. The largest majority are males, 77.7%, as expected. In terms of job title, more than 58% of our respondents is a managing partner or a general partner. If we disentangle between females and males, well, you can see that it appears that women tend to cover more junior positions. Concerning instead the profiles of the venture capital funds, the largest majority of our funds are independent venture capital funds. Just 7% are captive. And out of these 7% of captive funds, 40% are governmental venture capitalists, 24% bank affiliated, and 35% are corporate venture capitalists operating mainly in the telecom industry, in the consumer-related products, healthcare, biotech, and pharma. We also asked our sample VCs whether they could be considered as social impact venture capitalists, and 31%, more than 31% of them said that they defined themselves as a social impact VC. In terms of geographic focus, our funds, as you can see from the slide, are investing both domestic and cross-border. For the 38%, they have instead an exclusively domestic focus, and they instead invest just cross-border for the 24%. We also grouped our funds by vintage year. We defined a young fund having a vintage year starting from 2017. As you can see, more than 50% of our funds are young. 30% have a vintage year starting from 2012 to 2016. We also asked what was their committed capital in $1 million, and again, we defined a fund to be a small fund if it had committed capital less than $100 million. So we have about 50% of our venture capital funds which can be considered small. 38% instead have a committed capital between $100 and $500 million. And finally, we also asked how many companies approximately did they have in their funds portfolio. Again, as you can see, more than 58% of our funds have less than 15 firms in their portfolio. Just 5% of them have very large portfolios with more than 100 firms. Okay, so now I I leave the ground to Professor Annalisa Croce, who will continue presenting the rest of the results.
Okay, so good morning, everybody. Very nice to see you all here in Milan. Thank you, Elisa, for your methodological introduction. Now, in the next slide, we'll go through the question more strictly related to the structural changes deriving from COVID. The first question we propose to our sample is pretty general. So, after COVID, has your VC fund modified its investment strategies? Well, 1 out of 2 VC funds replied that at least moderately COVID impacted its investment strategies. Moreover, almost 5% of respondents indicated to be highly impacted by COVID. In our analysis, we tried to see whether there are some differences in answer according to some VC fund characteristics. In this case, we found a significant difference in the answer according to the location of the fund. And in particular, we found that non-European VC funds have been significantly more impacted in their investment strategies than European counterparts. Then we asked whether COVID influenced the time required to complete a deal. 1 fund out of 2 indicated that basically COVID influenced the time required. However, as you may see, there is not a clear direction, as 30% of respondents indicated an increase in time required after COVID, while less than 20% indicated a decrease in time required. Also, in this case, we found very useful to analyze whether answer change according to subsamples. And what we find is that the time required to complete a deal increased, especially for funds having less consolidated or less flexible investment strategies, such as social impact fund, smaller funds, and older ones, that had been more impacted by COVID in terms of time spent to complete a deal. Then we asked whether the target stage of funds changed after COVID. What we find is that COVID engendered a reduction in seed stage investments and an increase in later stage investments. We interpret this effect as a response of a need to reduce risk. In terms of industry, as one may expect, there has been an increase in some, let me say, central industries in COVID times, such as healthcare, pharma, and energy, and a decrease in traditional industries covered by VC, such as software, internet, and retail. On the one hand, the choice of these industries seems to be again in line with the need to reduce risk. However, it is important to highlight that when we analyze the number of industries invested pre and post-COVID, there is not an increase. This indicating that they do not choose to reduce in risk, diversifying more in an industrial point of view. But simply, it seems that funds choose to rebalance from a sectoral point of view instead of diversifying. From a geographical point of view, the VC funds seem to invest more in Europe and less in North America. In terms of country invested, only large VC funds seem to have chosen the way of diversifying more from a geographical point of view in order to reduce risk, as the number of countries invested after COVID seems to be higher than before, only for large VC funds. Then we asked, we posed several questions related to the different phases of the investment process. Starting from deal selection, basically we asked to the respondent to evaluate the relevance of different factors usually related to deal selection pre and post-COVID. So what you find in this graph is the percentage of respondents indicating a higher relevance after COVID versus the one of respondents indicating a lower relevance. And as you may see, all the objective factors useful in deal selection seems to increase. The only factor that decreases relevance after COVID is related to gut feel. So again, we interpret these results as a need to reduce uncertainty. In terms of valuation, VC funds seems to have reduced a bit their expectation in terms of IRR. In particular, here you may find the percentage of respondents indicating the difference returns pre and post-COVID. And again, in the bottom part of the slide, the balance between the respondents indicating an increase in returns expected after COVID and before. In terms of valuation, we asked how COVID impacted the valuation of the investments. And as you may see from these descriptives, it seems that after COVID, the valuation seems to be increased. This is in line with the availability of VC funds to pay more for those companies that seems to respect more stringent requirements asked after a crisis. In terms of deal structuring, again, we have a similar graph. We asked whether the different clauses normally used in contractual terms increase their relevance after COVID. And as you may see, we found that all clauses related to contractual terms seems to be more relevant after COVID. This indicating, suggesting a higher need from the part of VC to protect their investments in contractual terms. Moreover, we asked whether the percentage of the investments is changed after COVID. And what we find is that there is an increase in the percentage of syndicated investments. Again, we interpret this as a need to share risk with other investors. In the post-investment phase, we find that respondents indicate a higher frequency of interaction between entrepreneurs and manager of the funds. Again, we interpreted this evidence as a higher need to control and provide guidance to invested companies after COVID. And this is basically what we found also when we ask the relevance of value-added activities normally provided by VC. As you may see from this graph, all the value-added activities increase their relevance after COVID. The vast majority of respondents indicated an increase in relevance for all factors related to value-added activities. Finally, we ask an evaluation in terms of which is the impact of COVID in the portfolio, in your portfolio company, in the company you have already in your portfolio. And 4 out of 10 VC funds indicate a negative or highly negative effect. We tried to dig deeper these results through the following analysis that we report in this graph. Basically, here we report the percentage of respondents indicating a specific effect for how many companies in their portfolio. So if you look at the red line, for example, you may see that 40% of respondents indicated a highly negative effect, but for a very low percentage of companies in their portfolio. A similar interpretation may be done if you look at the orange line, in which we report the negative effect. So almost 30% of respondents indicated a negative effect for less than 20% of companies in their portfolio. While if you look at the green line, you may see that 20% of respondents indicated a null or even positive effect of COVID for the vast majority of companies in their portfolio. So what we may in some way summarize our results saying that of course COVID impacted the investment strategies of VC funds. 1 fund out of 2 replied to have been impacted by COVID. And we may in some way trace a red line through all the answers with a need to reduce risk. Reduce risk in different terms, in terms of choice of the target stage, investing less in seed stage, the choice of industries, investing in industries more central in coming times. In terms of higher interaction with entrepreneurs, lower expected returns and higher valuation of companies. Moreover, it is important to highlight that for 40% of respondents, COVID had a negative impact on the company even invested, even though this effect is limited in terms of number of companies in their portfolio. Finally, let me thank the team who worked on this project. Apart Elisa and me, Vincenzo Buttice that collaborated with us in the research design, and all our students that helped us in the survey, and a big thank especially to Matteo Ambrois, our PhD student, that worked very hard in analyzing data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annalisa. Just one additional thing. We will make soon this report available on our website. Now I would like to introduce you our first keynote speaker. So it's a great pleasure to have Dr. Helmut Kraemer-Eis from the European Investment Fund. Dr. Helmut Kraemer-Eis is Head of Research and Market Analysis and Chief Economist at the European Investment Fund. His team supports the European Investment Fund's business development and strategic decision-making processes through applied research, market analysis, surveys, and economic impact assessments. So thank you very much, Helmut. I give you the ground.
Thanks a lot, Elisa, for this kind introduction, and thanks a lot for having me here today. So I installed technology just quickly, but it's really great to be back in person. It's in fact the first in-person event for this year, and it's really nice. So I hope it's going to work. And now I have to find the presentation here on the computer. Okay, seems to work. Very good. So I'm going to talk about venture capital research at the EIF, and it's called Examples and Research Needs. So I'm going to focus on venture capital activities. Okay, just a second. Okay, now it works. I'm going to focus on our venture capital activities, and I want to provide an overview of venture capital research needs, a couple of research issues from a specific practitioner's perspective. But I don't want to simply list project after project, so I try to combine it a bit with a view on the European venture capital market and how we see the market and what comes out of these different research projects that we run internally. And we have as well a couple of research cooperations with external partners. Before I come to the real content of the presentation, I have to set the scene a bit and have to talk about my institution in order for you to better understand our research needs and the research activities. So we are an EU body dedicated to improving access to finance for small businesses in general. We do not invest or lend directly, and we are not a bank. So that means we do not invest into startup companies, but we invest into funds, and as a consequence, we from the research side have to have a look as well at the intermediary level. And we use financial instruments to address gaps, foster sustainability, multiply resources, so it's a crowding in approach. And in doing so, we improve access to finance for SMEs in general. We are kind of a strange animal. Our shareholdership is dominated by the EIB, the European Investment Bank, with almost 60%. And then we have the European Commission representing the European Union as shareholder with 30%. And we have a group of public and private financial institutions as shareholders, which lead to the fact that we are a kind of a public-private partnership, but dominated by the public. And we have public policy goals. So this has as well an impact then on our research and the research needs. Our products help small businesses at every stage of the development. So we look at all the development stages of the SMEs, even from pre-seed, via the seed phase, startup phase, the emerging growth, and then to the established and matured companies, but then of course more with debt-oriented products, in particular guarantee products. So I will focus here today. I fear the pointer will not work because it's so bright. No, it's not going to work. So I focus here on the center of the slide that you can see here, so on our venture capital activity only, but please keep in mind that in our research activities we look at everything, including the debt activities, of course. A few words about my team and our research. So we are a key element of our strategic development. We are covering all of EIF's current and also the future activities. We want to be internally and externally regarded as center of excellence for applied market research with a European-wide research network. As a consequence, our work is based on several pillars. Of course, we provide a lot of market analysis and internal information. So general market assessments, policy, strategy papers internally. As tool, we use quantitative and qualitative analysis, including surveys. I will come to this in a minute. So we provide a lot of internal information for the various services, for product development, mandate development, because we act a lot of on the basis of mandates from the European Commission, from the EIB, from member states, from regions, and we as research team, we have to advise the development of these various mandates. Where are market needs, what are the market needs, and we have to quantify these market needs. As a policy-driven institution, impact assessment is for us as well a very important activity from the research perspective. Impact assessment from two directions, ex ante and ex post. Ex ante, we need to assess the potential impact of our activities before we launch activities, not for each and every activity, but for many of the different measures that we are implementing. And ex post, we can claim ex ante that we have impact, but ex post we have to measure it, which is a particular challenge with regard to data, with regard to methodologies, with regard to different approaches. So we have to run quite a lot of these quantitative economic impact assessments, and this is an important exercise for us. Also, here on the impact side, we use surveys about the added value of EIF to get the opinions from the various market participants. And we are involved in plenty of audits and evaluations. Whenever EIF is analyzed, we have to provide our research input. We turn some of our research work into publicity, so that we produce working papers ourselves, that we explain to the external world what we are doing, why we are doing certain things, where we see the impact. So this is also an important element of our work. We have third-party publications, often presentations, external working groups, and the like. And on the right-hand side, you see corporations. So we have plenty of internal corporations with various teams, not only within EIF, but also within the group. Corporations and exchanges with external stakeholders, either market practitioners, business associations, but also international institutions like the OECD. The Commission is, of course, an important counterpart for us, the ECB, the IMF, and the like. So it's quite a big network. And last but not least, in this bubble, you see the joint research projects with external researchers. This is, of course, very important for us to have these research corporations, to outsource a part of the research, and to have research validation for what we are doing. And with some people here, or with many people here in the room, we have corporations, we had corporations, and I hope we can continue and even increase the corporations, also with BEF as newly created institute. Just a few examples with Massimo Colombo and Fabio Bertoni and Anita Quas. We did a very challenging, but finally very successful impact assessment on the guarantee side with Jörn and Christian also here in the room. We are running the various surveys. I will come back to this in a minute. With Elisa and team, we are just starting a very exciting project on climate and clean tech. With Benjamin, I'm discussing about impact investing and with his PhD student. So there is a lot of interaction with the academia, which is very, very important for us. So let's now come to a few elements of the research. I said I'll speak about and I'll focus on venture capital. Just one word about the general market and an example for as well research cooperation. We need to look at all markets where we as EIF are in detail, in quantitative and in qualitative terms, and there we have our European Small Business Finance Outlook, where we look at all markets. I don't go into detail here, but one element of this is as well that we developed an index a few years ago in cooperation with the London School of Economics. It's an index to track the SME's access to finance in the form of an index. We have several sub-indices with the loan sub-index, the equity sub-index, credit and leasing sub-index, and macroeconomic sub-index. And this helps us to track in relative terms the access to finance in the EU 27 countries in relative terms, as I said. And you see here on the left-hand side that traditionally the Scandinavian countries are performing very well in relative terms. Unfortunately, on the very right-hand side, since the creation of the index, we found always Greece, despite all the policy measures, not so many improvements, at least not in the ranking. We have an equity sub-index, and with this I'm really turning now to equity. And here we see as outlier Sweden, and in general the Scandinavian countries with a very good access to equity financing. Also the Netherlands is catching up. Here the equity environment increased significantly recently, mainly due to the doubling of the VC investments as share of GDP. It might be triggered or at least supported by an initiative that we are running in the Netherlands with the Dutch Venture Initiative, where we are cooperating with the national government to develop and further develop the national venture capital market. Of course, we also have to track the market activities over time, and I show here data from Invest Europe, which is basically the key source of information for us. But I don't have to tell you about information problems and issues of data in the venture capital business. And as I said, we have to track different data sources over time. And what can happen is that in extreme situation, you can see in the various data points even different developments. So when the COVID crisis, for example, broke out, we had to have a look at what happens in the market, and some indicators went up, some went down, depending on at which database you looked at. And the reason is different definitions of all these different databases. And this is something that needs to be borne in mind. And it's an important feature of this market. Often this is not considered in research. In the data here, you see on the left-hand side fundraising, on the right-hand side investment. We went through a deep valley with venture capital activity during the global financial crisis. This is clearly visible here in the data. But after that valley, we started a kind of a boom phase. On the left-hand side, you see that the curve goes a bit down for 2020. That was an initial COVID effect, but 21 goes up again. So we are still in a boom phase. Also on the right-hand side, you see it for the investment amounts. We also need to track who invests into venture capital. This is also an important perspective for us. Here you see as well Invest Europe data. And if you look at the pink line, you see the share of government agencies in venture capital fundraising. This is, of course, a very high share for Europe. It is, in the long run, maybe even an unsustainable share, but it shows as well the counter-cyclical actions of the public players in the market. Because in particular during crisis times, I mentioned the global financial crisis, the market would not have survived to the same extent without massive investments of the public players in the market. And this money also tries to crowd in the private investments. And we as EIF, we present around 10 to 15% of new venture capital fundraising regularly. Despite the booming market, is everything bright? No, it's not bright. I show here just two examples of problems, because there is a significant activity gap versus other regions of the world, in particular the US. And I mentioned the very positive volume developments in Europe, but we compare the European market to the US, and we continue to see a clear gap. For example, in terms of venture capital fundraising, in 2020, the values in the US were 4.5 times the values in Europe. And despite the booming European market, the gap in absolute and relative terms is even growing. And specific structural issues persist, for example, in the European scale-up market. And in this context, there are also issues related to the exit environment, as well as a lack of European institutional money in the market. Moreover, fund sizes are often still an issue in Europe. Bigger funds mean better possibilities to invest bigger tickets, which are necessary in scale-up financing, but still to achieve important portfolio diversification. And I show here the distribution of fund sizes for the fund vintages 2017 to 21, and compared Europe in pink to the US in blue. And the picture is clear. In particular, for the larger fund sizes, there is a gap. And to be borne in mind for such data here is that it even includes UK and Switzerland. So looking only at EU 27 looks even worse. And as a consequence, for large financing rounds in Europe, non-European investors are filling the void. The later the stage of the company and the larger the financing round, the more international is the investor pool. From a policy perspective, this raises different types of concerns, like the risk of foreign relocation, brain drain, tech leadership, also sovereignty. In fact, research shows that entrepreneurs supported by foreign VC investors are more likely to also experience a foreign exit or IPO, and that many venture-backed European startups that exited via M&A were acquired by non-European buyers, in particular from the US and Asia. On the other hand, cross-border investment flows demonstrate the internationalization and development of the European tech investment landscape. And it's finally a question of how to mitigate negative spillovers. How much relocation finally happens is also a function of the strengths of the domestic ecosystem. And in the stronger domestic ecosystem, local entrepreneurs have fewer reasons to leave and in fact more reasons to return. And therefore, we need both an enabling and further developing strong European venture capital ecosystem that ensures efficient interactions and connections between existing and new activity hubs in Europe. And we need more European investors with sufficient firepower and also more institutional investors. So often people say, yeah, we have a booming market and there is also more foreign money coming to, or non-European money coming to the market, so there is no issue. But from a policy perspective, and I said that we are a policy-driven institution, there can be significant issues. And as a consequence of such type of research and market analysis, we as EIF, we started a couple of years ago an initiative called the Asset Management Umbrella Fund. That's a fund where we try to incentivize, or where we provide a structure for institutional investor to invest via the EIF into the venture capital market. So to provide them a platform so they don't have to invent or reinvent the wheel, and they don't have to build up the capacities to analyze venture capital, so that they can do it via the EIF. So we want to crowd in long-term private investors for the market. Another example of a research consequence is that very recently we initiated a pan-European scale-up initiative in Europe, and the idea here is to support the emergence of bigger European venture capital funds in order to support the scale-up financing. A few words about our equity surveys. So we get a lot of information from our own data and from external databases. However, there is significant information missing, in particular real-time information and forward-looking information. And we are trying to fill this gap with our family of surveys. And the project started in 2017 with venture capital. It's now a long-standing cooperation with the team of the University of Trier, with Jan Block and his team, and also, as I mentioned earlier, Christian was and will be involved. So these are online surveys. It's an anonymous approach, which is super important for us to get honest answers from the market participants. We survey EIF counterparts and non-EIF counterparts, and it's a cooperation with key stakeholders. So we have the Commission on board, the Joint European Research Center, the Invest Europe, and several other partners like associations on the business angel side. The responses in these surveys are typically from senior people, which is also an important feature. A few general elements of the survey. So it's regular. We need to get the regular information from the market. Typically it's annually. We had exceptional waves in 2020 because COVID broke out and there was such a huge uncertainty in the market, so we had to generate more knowledge about the market. We even had the advantage when we were out with the first wave in the market, COVID broke out, so we can split the first wave into pre-COVID and at the time of the breakout of COVID, and then with the second wave in the middle of COVID. We have one stable element of the survey, that's the market sentiment, and then we group always a couple of different, for us, hot topics around this market sentiment questions. So we started with venture capital, then we added the business angel survey in 2019. In 2020, we added the mid-market survey, and last year we had the private debt survey, a very difficult market segment, very opaque market segment. But this is not going to be an annual survey. so this is going to be repeated, but not immediately. As I said, we have different survey topics. The market sentiment in the upper left part, you see that's our stable element. We had questions around the EIF's added value. So how do the counterparts see us in the market? What is our added value in the market? What are the disadvantages? What needs to be improved? So this is an important learning exercise for us. We also want to get criticism from the counterparts, and that's why it's so important to have an anonymous approach for us from the research side. Questions around the product development, mandate development, questions around ESG, as I said, we cover hot topics. Environment and climate is very important. Policy recommendations that we get from the market that we can as well then channel, for example, to the European Commission to consider then in new programs. Socioeconomic characteristics, gender is a very hot topic in the market, and of course COVID was very, very important for us. Just for illustration, a few items from the latest venture capital survey. So we had 479 responses, and we focus on Europe only. It was nicely distributed over the different stages. In terms of sectors, the focus was not surprisingly on the traditional VC sectors, ICT, biotech, health, energy, and environment. As I said, I just want to show a few examples here. So we had the market sentiment as the stable pillar, and of course questions around COVID and the impact of COVID. This is already published, and currently we are working on the publication for the gender questions and environment and climate. What are the issues in the market? What are the key challenges? And here we see that for the investors, the high investee company valuation have become, for the first time since we ran the survey, the most important issue. And for us, this is as well important because this can influence our policy and how we react and interact with the funds. So we need to look at these issues that are existing in the market. In previous years, fundraising was the #1 issue, but now it's still an issue, but on a second position in Europe. And we have to bear in mind we are in a booming market, and in relative terms, fundraising situation is good for the VC funds, and they are telling us in the survey, but still they see it as an issue. And these issues are not all the same in all countries. So then we look at how is the situation in the different countries or different country groups, and I know it's a quite packed slide here, but it shows that, for example, in the South and in Central and Eastern Europe, fundraising is the #1 issue, whereas in the center and in the Nordics, the #1 issue is more the valuations, so the high investee company valuation. If we look through the fund to the level of the portfolio company, that's as well what we are doing in our surveys, we see that there is one clear outlier. Recruiting high-quality professionals has again become the first most important challenge, and that's something that we do not only see in venture capital surveys, but it's a general issue of the economy. The shortage of adequately trained and motivated staff is becoming an issue everywhere, and of course it is an issue for startup companies. So this is something important. This is an important message for policymakers as well, but also an important message for academia. So we need to have more adequately trained people. Just a quick look at the confidence of the venture capital markets. The average confidence in the long-term growth prospects of European VC are seen quite positively or very positively. We distinguish here between the general VC market, and we have as well questions about the own VC market, so the segment where the respondent is in. And in both areas we see very positive developments. It was even in the previous wave on all-time high. To be seen now with the new geopolitical turbulences, the war in the Ukraine, and the macroeconomic uncertainties and developments, whether this positive sentiment still remains. We are going to see that then in the next survey wave. With regard to sectors, we didn't see significant sector rotation, and I think it was a kind of confirmed as well in the previous presentation. So in Europe, the impact of COVID was not so dramatic, but there was one clear winner, of course, during the pandemic. The investment potential in healthcare and life science sectors continued to increase, so this sector is a clear winner of the crisis. And in general, venture capital and private equity delivers technology applications that enable greater digitization of businesses and processes. And also sustainability is on the rise, including transition to greener energy and climate change related investments. But that's a rather normal development in the market, but these areas are getting more momentum. And the crisis can be seen, or was seen as well, as an opportunity. So VC companies, they provide solutions for societal problems and also for the necessary creative destructions. And that's as well why we didn't see such a dramatic effect, or no dramatic effect in the COVID crisis, but rather on the opposite side, a positive development, positive momentum in the market with record volumes compared to the global financial crisis, completely different performance of the market, where we at the time had to run through a very, very deep valley. I have here the summary of the market situation, but in the interest of time, I think I will skip that. So overall, the market is very, very positive, but challenges still remain, in particular in venture capital, in the area of scale-up financing. The IPOs are still an issue. And of course, we still see rationale for continued public support of the market, and in particular a need of more long-term institutional investors in the market. So as general survey benefits and developments, so they contribute to our internal development of products and mandates. They inform policymakers and other external stakeholders. Provides for us an opportunity to cooperate with external players. So it's a very important information tool for us. And as next steps, we are preparing the launch of the next wave for this year, and then only the venture capital and private equity mid-market. And we are working on the results of the recent business angel survey. I mentioned that we are a policy-driven institution. So what effects can we see then from our activities? This is something that we have to analyze in detail, and that's an important pillar for our work. We want to be an impact-driven institution, and we need to measure and analyze this impact based on EIF data, but also based or combining the EIF data with market data. So I need to see if this animation is working here. Yeah, it kind of works. What we did is that we geolocated all EIF-backed seed and startup companies, as well as the VC firm's headquarters, in order to portray these VC investments as links of our network. This is based on real data, and we analyzed how the money flew then from us to the VC funds and then to the companies, and what happens with this money. And remarkable features of this network relate to both concentration but also dispersion. And this is something that we, yeah. Here it is easier to see. So what we saw is, I said, the concentration and the dispersion. With the increasing volumes of our activity, also the breadth of the activity expanded over time. And you can see this here on we call it the weather map, with the increasing pink. You see the concentration, so the emergence of the bubbles, but you see as well the dispersion of the activity. And the concentration, that's what clearly shows the hub creation and the emergence of the venture capital hubs as the backbone of the VC ecosystem in Europe. Here you can see it maybe a bit clearer. So it is important to see that these VC hubs, they communicate, so there are consistent cross-investment routes among matured hubs. And what is super important for these hubs is then not only the emergence of a center of activity for venture capital, but also that these hubs connect to other hubs. And this is something that we want to achieve and that we want to promote then over time. And through the promotion of cross-border oriented VC firms, EIF supports the build-up of a European venture capital market. And as I said, these analyses, they are based on EIF data, and we really squeezed the data from all different directions. And we published a series of papers to analyze our portfolio from all these different directions. And the start of the series was groundbreaking work. It analyzed the spatial dispersion and concentration of the activity. That was the basis for the animations that I just showed. And we analyzed the communication between these hubs and the interaction between these hubs. The second paper was a cluster analysis in order to introduce a taxonomy of different startup profiles. The third paper looked at liquidity events of startups backed by EIF. And the fourth paper looked at patents as element of innovation. And we identified in our portfolio 16,000 patents. These patents are very difficult to analyze because there are patent abstracts. This is text, so we had to analyze 16,000 texts, and we did this with machine learning technologies, and then we structured these different patents into groups to better understand what really happens in our portfolio, and from this we can also then tell more about the impact of our activities. Then there were two more papers in this series. Paper 5 and 6 were counterfactual analysis. We used very innovative features here like machine learning, satellite imagery. We also analyzed flight routes in order to see the interconnectedness between different hubs. So very challenging exercises, but exercises that provide us with a lot of knowledge about the impact of our activities. And the studies are based on advanced counterfactual analysis methodologies. They undergo in-depth internal review process as well as discussions with academia. And we typically publish these studies, and you can find them online. As I said, this was based on EIF data, but we wanted to look a bit beyond. And we started a cooperation with Invest Europe, and were able to access part of their data. And we published 2 years ago what we call the VC factor, because we wanted to have a look at what is the impact of venture capital in general, not EIF-supported venture capital, but venture capital in general. And we transferred the knowledge that we gained with our internal studies then to a broader market-based study. This was a unique cooperation, a unique project. It revealed plenty of features about the venture capital market. And the VC factor, it employs cluster analysis to evaluate and group the VC-backed firms. And the startup growth can be sorted in 5 profiles. We call them laggards, commoners, all-rounders, visionaries, and superstars. And we had a look, how did these companies perform then over time? What happened to these companies? And the VC factor also examines the role of venture capital in fostering then startup growth by constructing a group of comparative firms which could have received venture financing but did not. And in a nutshell, I cannot go into details here, what we found was when an entrepreneurial idea has a high potential for success, the VC factor expands opportunities for growth and allows excelling startups to unleash their full potential. So VC is the spinach for Popeye. if you see Popeye as the startup company. VC does not help to turn a bad company into a good one, but if you have a good company, VC can make it great. And this is a detailed analysis that we performed with this first VC factor. And then last year we had a second VC factor. Of course, we had to look at the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic, data-driven. The second edition provides data-driven insights into European venture capital and its resilience to the COVID crisis. And we analyzed what we call the black swan event, so the COVID crisis. And by comparing the VC activity in 2020 versus the historical average, as well as the VC activity under lockdown versus no lockdown conditions, the report reveals then the newfound resilience of the venture capital market. That is a big success for the market. I said that was completely different compared to the global financial crisis. And we can say it's as well a success for the public support of the market, because it seems to work and the market seems to perform now much better and much more resilient in times of crisis. So all this is then in detail analyzed in our Black Swan report. I had put some results here together about the second VC factor, but I call it TLDR, so too long didn't read for the ones who don't want to read all the reports. But also, in the interest of time, I will skip these results here, but I can provide, of course, the presentation later on. Just to come to one important element and an emerging element where I would like to spend the last minutes on: climate and green tech. This is, it's called a new hot topic, but unfortunately it's new in terms of research and in terms of policy making. The climate crisis is, of course, not new. I studied environmental economics more than 25 years ago, and the problems were the same, and also solutions were on the table, but a lot of time passed since then, and there was not enough activity. Much more could have been done, but now the topic gets more and more attention, in the financial industry. The industry gets much more pressure to act, to react, to introduce measures and to change behavior, which is a very positive development. ESG is a super hot topic in the financial industry. And for the EIB and EIB group as such, the EIB wants to turn itself into the EU climate bank. So climate is going to be the overarching topic for everything what the group does. So also for the financing. The group has developed what we call the Climate Bank Roadmap. So that's a roadmap that explains the direction we want to go to. And this has, of course, consequences for our research as well. So climate is gaining clearly importance. We started last year, 2 years ago, first projects with the approximation of aggregate SME mitigation investment demand, estimation of future investment needs for corporate contribution to renovation waves, a preliminary analysis of the EU green tech ecosystem, where we use private equity investment statistics. So we first need to get a feeling about what are the investment needs in the market. And the investment needs are, of course, enormous. What needs to happen in the market? How can ESG better be monitored? How do we have to behave as a finance provider, as an important provider of money in the market? What type of pressure can we give as well to counterparts, also to behave in line then with our new requirements and our new objectives? And this is something that we have as well defined in our public policy goals. I don't want to go into details here. And we are currently changing our strategic approach away from a generalistic approach towards clearly defined public policy goals. And climate and everything around green is, of course, a super important element in this context, not only for venture, but for everything what we do. And in this context, we are very soon going to start a very exciting project, also with a research corporation, in this case then with Elisa and her team. Elisa is the academic coordinator then of the project, where we are going to have a detailed analysis of the EU green tech ecosystem. This is also something that is clearly under-researched, so we need to get much more information about the market. We need to get a better understanding of these markets. So we want to achieve a mapping of the clean tech sector using machine learning techniques. There will be different empirical analysis, and I'm very much looking forward to this project. So as I said, green climate, this is an overarching topic and will be embedded in everything what we are going to do in the future, also from the research side. To close, and I think I'm in time, yes. A few ideas for future research, also from the academic perspective. What are the research needs for our side? And in general, everything around market failures, market weaknesses, market gaps is something that's in our interests. Because we as a policy-driven institution, we should only act if there are market failures and market weaknesses. If markets are working properly, we are not needed. And that's something where we as researchers need to contribute to. And this is not only on the level of the general market, but as well in specific regional markets, but also in specific segments and thematics of the market. So we really need to use the magnifying lens and to dig deeper into details. What are real effects of foreign venture capital investments? I mentioned it earlier in the presentation that non-European investors are filling the void. What is an under-researched area? What is really the consequence of that? Of course, internationalization is good, but from a policy perspective, if then later on the companies leave to non-European countries, if there is a brain drain, if the researchers are leaving Europe, that's not what we want to achieve with the policy support in Europe. And here, the real effects, they are clearly an under-researched area. We see in research that if there are more foreign investors in a company or in a financing round, then the likelihood of the company having a non-European IPO is increasing. But what are the real consequences? What are the economic effects? Where does the economic activity goes to? That's clearly an under-researched area. Linked to that, where does Europe want to be in the future? What are the key enabling technologies? Where do we want to see ourselves? And what does it mean concerning market needs, market gaps, financing needs? These are important elements for us. And as I mentioned, many topics around green climate are the climate crisis and the impact of the financing needs is still a very, very under-researched area that we need to have better data, more information, more analysis, in particular with regard to small and medium-sized enterprises. Research often looks at what is the effect of big corporates, but often the SMEs are not covered. And I mentioned it here, the value and valuation drivers of venture capital is, of course, for us important, including the exit valuation. We saw that the valuation of the investee companies are seen as a big issue in the market. What are the drivers of this valuation, of the exaggeration and the valuation? We see the SPAC market, we saw the boom in the SPAC market. We see now that this market is very much calming down. Also here, valuation plays a role. We saw that last year, the year before, there were excessive valuations in the IPOs. Then now the valuations of these companies, once they are then public, they go down dramatically, also with a negative reputation impact then again on the general topic of venture capital financing and equity financing. So everything around these, but these are just a few examples. So there is endless research needs from our side, and an institution like BEF can certainly help here, and I'm very honored to be on the advisory board of BEF, and if I can provide input and ideas from a practitioner's perspective, I'm happy to do so. And with this, I say thank you for your attention, and we can move to the next point. And I think this is a practitioner's panel, and now you see then the real practitioner on stage in the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Helmut, for your inspiring insights. So maybe I ask, before proceeding to the round table, if anybody from the audience has any question for Helmut. I come with the microphone in case someone is interested. Any question? Please raise your hands.
Yes, well, just to break the ice, you mentioned several very, very interesting and important things. I just pick one. And I like very much your dynamic map with the increasing number of hubs in the European venture capital market. So to some extent, there has been a territorial democratization of venture capital, but still venture capital is very concentrated in great metropolitan areas, right? Yep. No longer only Paris and London, but still these are big cities, right? Like Milan or Budapest, but still big cities. And a peculiarity of Europe is that conversely, and this is different from the US or even from China, innovation is very widespread from a geographical perspective. Right? So, for instance, patenting is much more dispersed geographically in Europe in comparison to other geographical areas. And so there is a mismatch between where money is, which is still concentrated in great metropolitan areas, and where innovation is, which is widespread. Right? And so this creates a big policy issue to bring, either to bring money to where innovation is, or to bring innovation where money is. And my question is whether you think that one of the externality created by COVID concerning the use of digital tools for interaction between people could to some extent help bridging this gap, this geographical gap.
It indeed could help to bridge this gap, but currently we don't see these effects. But we see that rather this concentration is further increasing. That's a surprise indeed. But this focus on hubs, and compared to the breadth of innovation activities, this is as well an under-researched area where we need more research. For example, also what is a driver and what are the key elements for emergence of hubs. We tried to look at this, and we saw that the reasons for the creation of hubs can be completely different if you compare hub by hub. If you compare the hubs versus innovation, that's an issue of the use of external equity in general in Europe, because there is still a strong reluctance for companies, even innovative companies, to take external equity on board. Because we look here at venture capital hubs, these are not only innovation hubs, but there are many innovative companies outside of these hubs that are not willing to take external equity for various reasons. And also here we need to achieve a cultural change then over time. But in the US, it is a kind of similar. There is a spread of innovation activities, and there is a strong clustering of the venture capital activities. We often talk about venture capital in the US, but if you look at in detail at it, it is also really clustered there. And with this cluster analysis, also we want to achieve a kind of change in thinking, because you mentioned France. We talk about the venture capital market in France. We talk about the venture capital market in Germany and other countries, but de facto it's really clustered, and we need to talk about the venture capital market driven by Paris and other centers of the activity. But clearly an under-researched area where we also need to get more knowledge.
Yes, Cristina Rossi. For a start, thank you very much for your great presentation. It was very, very insightful. And I have many questions for you about gender issues, because I'm working on the topic. Meanwhile, here I want to speak about the elephant in the room. What do you think will be the consequences of the current war scenario on the venture capital market in the upcoming years?
That's unfortunately currently impossible to predict. Currently, we don't see dramatic consequences in the market. The situation is just too fresh. Impact on venture capital is limited. That's something that we want to find out indeed with our next survey, where we will ask what are the impacts of the current situation, not only the war, but also everything what is related to this. Increasing energy prices, does this have an impact on sector rotation and investment activities and the like? But in the long run, we will see, but I can only speculate, many changes in the markets, because we will see reallocation of wealth, a decline of wealth. We will see stronger focus on defense money that's moving away from other products, from other activities towards defense and things related to defense. But also other consequences. For example, I could imagine more venture capital activity, and I'm just talking about venture capital here, because if I go beyond, that's too much. I could imagine more venture capital investments in areas related to defense, security, in particular as well, cyber security, also typical tech areas. So I could imagine that we'll see a sector rotation. But we also have to see, we have dramatically increasing inflation. This will cause as well rising interest rates that might have an impact on the readiness of investors to invest into alternative asset classes, including venture capital. So this can be an indirect effect as well. So it's a very, very complex and unfortunately dangerous situation, but I can't give you a precise answer now.
So this is Anita Guas. Thank you very much, Helmut. I really like the presentation, and also for giving us all these insights about what we should be doing next. My question is this. The European Investment Fund has been supporting venture capital funds in Europe since the 90s. And I understand that at least originally the mission was to support emerging general partners. But now you are mentioning scale-up gap, and of course, if you want to fix the scale-up gap, you need larger funds, which are usually managed not by new general partners, but by more established general partners. So does this mean that, let's say, the selection criteria that the European Investment Fund is using when selecting VC funds to support is changing? Are you moving towards more later stage or more developed funds? Thanks.
The approach in general will be changing. As I said, we will move more towards the public policy goals as we define them. But that does not mean that we move away from, for example, first-time teams. It's still very important to have more first-time teams in the market. There is increased uncertainty for these teams. So we need to provide the necessary signaling effects that other investors come into the market. But whenever we see other emerging weaknesses, market weaknesses, or market failures, like the scale-up gaps, we feel obliged to act. And I mentioned this European Scale-Up initiative that we are launching also together with the EIB and the European Commission. So the approach in general will be more selective, driven by public policy goals, but we are not going to leave the markets in specific areas. And as you saw on this heat map as well, the breadth of the activity is widening, and that will continue to be an objective as well. So if we can support the emergence of new venture capital hubs somewhere, then these hubs connect to other hubs and develop then over time, that is as well, or continues to be an important policy objective for us.
Good morning, thanks for your presentation. Since the policy stance by the Federal Reserve has clearly changed, and the European Central Bank is more or less going to do the same in the future months, do you think that this will have an impact on capital allocation and fundraising and capital flows between the different regions of the world? I mean, I saw the flows, the dynamic flows between US and China into towards Europe, and they were pretty significant. So I mean, this can be a source of concern for you.
Here again, I can only speculate, but there might be an impact on the risk-taking behavior of investors due to increased risk in general and increased uncertainty in the markets, but also due to increasing interest rates and reallocation of money. So there might be a slowdown also in the alternative asset market. But as I said, and as I showed on the graphs, we are in a boom phase currently still in the market with record activity levels. If the market calms down a bit, and in particular if valuations calm down a bit, that's maybe not a bad thing. The question is, are we going to see a harsher impact on the market? And I don't see it yet, but it cannot be excluded.
Hi. I'm going back to your presentation, which I enjoyed very much. And I found very interesting the data that you showed about the entry and exit of venture capital after 1 year, 2 years, 6 years. And so I was wondering whether there is a difference in these entry-exit rates between the European countries and the US. That is, if there is a higher inner dynamics in the US with respect to Europe.
We performed the analysis only for the European countries. We only had the data for the European countries, so I cannot make a comparison to the US, unfortunately. Yeah, but would be interesting. Would be interesting.
You have two sides. One is that maybe the US companies or ventures will find easier capital, or whether they also risk. There is a different kind of risk attitude by the entrepreneurs. So that's an interesting point, I think, also for research.
Could as well be an interesting point for research. And on the one hand, the access to venture capital is for sure easier for US-based companies. Also, the risk-taking behavior of the companies will be different.
That's why I would expect probably a higher exit and entry rate.
Yeah, but I can't provide you with data on that.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, we could move to the round table. So I ask the speakers to come. Okay, so the speakers are Angelo Coletta, InnovUp, Matteo Leonardi, Italian Angels for Growth, Cesare Maifredi, 360 Capital, Matteo Masserdotti, Viceversa, and Anna De Stefano, Doorway. The table is moderated by Professor Giancarlo Giudici.
Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, meine Damen und Herren, caballeros y damas, thank you for being here for this exciting practitioner session in this event of the Bureau of Entrepreneurial Finance. I'm Giancarlo Giudici, teacher of corporate finance at Politecnico di Milano, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to organize this event with practitioners. I think it's very important for academics to be always in touch with practitioners because they can give us feedback, they can give us suggestions on our work, they can provide data which are valuable for us, and we can find always opportunities of cooperation to spread the research, knowledge, and even to give indications and suggestions to policymakers. So we are living in an unprecedented, I would say, moment in which we had first the pandemic, and we have seen the research by our colleagues showing us the effect of the pandemic on entrepreneurial finance and VC funds. But now we are living another moment in which, yes, we have a war, and we have also unprecedented level of inflation in different countries. Interest rates are starting to grow up. We have companies struggling with energy costs. So probably we need a second research next year to show what is the effect of this new wave of problems, troubles, and volatility on the markets. But now it's time to leave the floor to our guest. So let me introduce you again Anna De Stefano, who is Chief Legal Design and Communication Officer in Doorway. Doorway is an equity crowdfunding platform in Italy, which is specialized in the relationship with business angels. And Anna has also an experience in angel investing. She was named European Women of Legal Tech. Right. And then she will talk about this later. And then on my right, we have Matteo Leonardi. Matteo Leonardi is a senior investment analyst in Italian Angels for Growth, which is a leading network of business angels in Italy. Then we have Cesare Maifredi. Cesare Maifredi is general partner in a venture capital fund, which is 360 Capital. We have also a relationship as Politecnico with this fund, and we will listen to this experience. And last but not least, Matteo Masserdotti, which is the founder of an equity crowdfunding platform, 200 Crowd, and since he was not just happy about this, he founded another startup company in the fintech industry, Viceversa. So we will listen to this experience. I will start with Anna, asking about the effect of the pandemic on startup investments and angel investing. We have seen some data and survey facts in the beginning, but now let's hear from the words of practitioners to your opinion and understanding what has been the effect of the pandemic on the industry for entrepreneurial finance.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Giudici. It has been really a pleasure to be here in such an interesting Congress and with so many very important panelists with whom I'm really curious to know, to share our experience and our activities. As we were saying before, I am a business angel myself, and I also part of IAGO, of Italian Angels for Growth, and I work also with Doorway. And with Doorway, we always try to bring to widespread the investment in venture investing, in startups and PMEs, allowing more people to invest in this kind of newborn enterprises that are going to build the new future. What we're really aiming to do is trying to build a new future, to have more people that can invest in this kind of activity, that believe in building a better companies, better future, better innovation, more inclusive, more equitable, more sustainable. And this is, let's say, the main vision, the main goal also of Doorway. And we try to do this via our platform that is the investments of people that want to that share this vision and want to take part in building the new economy and the new inclusive future. What we've seen in these last 2 years, and unfortunately in these few months that started in 2022, I have to say that during pandemics, especially at the beginning, everyone were taken by shock, and it was total unexpected and unprecedented. And I think that both startups and investors have been shocked by this and tried to understand what was going on, what it was the future that was expecting. And that at that point, I think that two things made a big difference: cash and team. So I remember at the beginning of the pandemics, there were a real strong guidelines to all the startups, also to all the startups where we invested, and I myself have invested, to speak with founders and check cash. Check and understand which were the expected cash flows. Of course, try to reduce costs, and because revenues that are always unpredictable were going to be even more unpredictable. And so there's been this great focus on cash, which in the startup world is always there, but with the COVID it's been stronger. And but after the first shock, where we were all really concerned about how to manage the cash flows, then I think that very important was the focus on the team, because at that moment we felt that we had to support the team. We have to support first of all on the psychological point of view, but also on a strategical point of view and economic point of view, in order to help them to understand how to drive with such a big uncertainty. So starting developing a little bit of scenario forecasting, scenario budgeting, but also having teams focusing on their core values and core value proposition in order to focus on what is the real difference and how to defend it and how to adjust it in the new scenario. And I think that this has been another lesson from the COVID, that great teams can be resilient and can adjust even more if they are very clear about who they are, what they want, and which is their value proposition. And so in this way, they also can manage this in a, let's say, not easier, but more professional way, and deal with, and stitching with this, adapt to the new uncertain backgrounds and scenarios that are going. So these are probably on the practical side are two of the main aspects or lessons learned from the COVID. On the other side, more on a general speaking, on a general background, and also after, let's say, 2 years since the COVID pandemic has started, we have seen also an unprecedented amount of money that has been invested in venture investing, generally speaking, both from private investors and public investors. And in Italy, this has been even bigger with the new entrance of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti that has started to work hard in this field. And my opinion also in this, the effect of this has been, from on one side, for sure, a big help in the developing of the startups and helping startups, existing startups to grow and adjust, and also helping new startups coming in. And so in a certain way, it answered a little bit to the question, to the problem of shortage, of cash shortage before. But on the other side, I think it brought also another lesson, that is uncertainties can always hide some opportunities. And these months has been for sure an opportunity for digital sector and digital activities, which have had a great boost. Generally, I would say generally speaking, not only in Italy but also worldwide. Cybersecurity has been for sure one of the main topic that has been raised to the let's say to the importance of the scene. And also investments on health, and that was obvious given the kind of pandemics. But also, I think that it has given more the idea of finding new solution is definitely a must for the new economy and the new society that we want to build, because new company has started and new way of working together have been much bigger and much more flexible. There have been, I also assisted to building up of working groups, if not startups, that started really online, that started in hackathons, that started in a European hackathon, EU versus virus. So there has been, let's say, on the other side, really a close-up of the world, especially given by the digital means. And this, I think, also is another important point, that there have been, especially young generations, generally speaking, founders have found a way of replying to these difficulties, joining together and using the new tools that were provided, and inventing new tools, and showing how this new way of working within a digital environment can be effective and productive also on the long term. Now I think we're facing another problem, another scenario, and probably different scenario with a different kind of uncertainty, that is the uncertainty coming out from the war, that is not only the uncertainty related to Russia and Ukraine, but all the related problems that also were mentioned before, like shortage of supplies, like also the problem, the high inflation, and all the other problems that we all know. In my opinion, these months at present, also probably also because we're living them, so we're not just 2 years later, so we have a little bit of guidelines, but we're living them. I think these uncertainties are probably a little bit more profound than the ones before, also because it's a very serious situation, also totally unexpected, and we didn't expect that something like this could happen in Europe in the years 2000. And I think that this is something that could also touch a little bit long term, and we've seen that for the first time compared to last year, to the last quarters, investments in venture investing have slowed down. I have read some reports that they showed a decrease in the first quarter of investments in venture investing compared to last year's first quarter. Just yesterday, I saw another report from our crowd that was saying that no, there is not a decrease. It's flat, and being flat is still a good point, given the fact that last year has been really a rising star year. So what I would say that probably this year it's going to be really much more cautious about investing, and probably also in startups, finding a way to develop new startups, because except, let's say, for probably cybersecurity and digital activities, and probably also fintech, that are still on the major ground. But I think that this year venture, it will be a year of more cautious for investments, and more cautious also for the amount of investments done. This, I think, will always bring to the fact to the teams. Teams so will always be crucial, and in this case even more crucial. The help of venture investors would be even more crucial in order to help startups to really focus on the main path, and also to help startups in reading the scenarios, the situation, and finding how to adjust, and also how to cut out some of the activities that are not possible anymore, or that the future situation cannot be proven feasible. And so what I would say is that 2022 will be a year where probably we will try to consolidate what we've done during the pandemics, and adjust it to a new way of reading again the world, where probably sustainability, inclusion, or also the big values of the new society that we want to build will be even more important for the startup world, and choosing the investments, in the successful investments, because probably this year is a turning point in what will be the next decade, not only from an economical point of view, but also from a political and social point of view. Or at least this is my opinion. I'm very curious to hear the opinion of my colleagues here that are also very important players on the ground. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to hear that there is also coherence with the evidence found by Annalisa and Elisa related to the fact that startup can be seen as an option for a new business, and we know that when there is larger volatility, the value of options on the market is larger. So good news for someone, but bad news like any disruptive innovation for others. So differently from business angels, funds, they have also to raise money on the market. So Cesare, what is your impression about the effects of the pandemic and the new world that we are seeing? Is it easier or more difficult to raise money on the market for a fund? It is easier or more difficult to find good opportunities for investee companies?
Yeah, okay. No, thank you for the question. I mean, those are two different questions. I think that regarding funds and raising money, I'd say that I think we are going to go into difficult times, to be honest, very, very bluntly, because for sure the past 5 years were record years, and everybody was basically able to raise money without major issues, although from the presentation we could see the differences in, between the major European countries like France and the UK, well, still in Europe, I guess, at least geographically, and Germany versus the smaller countries.
from a VC perspective, like Italy, Spain, and other. So still, the last 5 years were very good years, both for thanks to the support that EIF and the local governments, in a way, local institutional banks gave to the system. Going forward, I'm a little bit less positive, because for sure, I guess, I'm almost sure that the support of those institutions will continue, but while in the past 5 years we saw other institutional money, meaning pension funds and similar institutions to look at VC as a possible alternative to their traditional strategy, which was mainly dedicated to bonds and some equity investments in the public market, other than real estate, which obviously is a big piece of usually their investments. So we saw some positive signals from there, and I think that we, as a managers, we were able to tap into that pool of capital fairly successfully. And their main reason to try VC and to try alternatives, actually, in general, in VC in particular, was, well, within this climate where interest rates are very, very low, it's the only alternative for us to try to, differentiate a bit the portfolio and look for higher returns. Obviously, now things are, to me, are quickly changing. We know that interest rates are not still, I mean, we didn't raise interest rates, but I think that given the situation with inflation, I think that things are going to change, I would say, fairly rapidly, although the risk of war and COVID still remain and might lead our central banks to still try to keep the interest low. But eventually, I think that this is going to happen. I see on a daily basis, working with more than 60 companies, that the inflation is actually there. We can probably see it, in our everyday life. So this will imply, at a certain point in time, a change in the policy, which to me will quickly move money from the alternative assets to bonds and maybe some equity, but mainly bonds. So given that inherently some of the institutional investors that turned to VC in the past 5 years are not really big fan of VC money, of investing in VC, I think it was more an obligation, if you want, rather than a real belief in the strategy. I do think that they will quickly move back to what they like the most, and therefore I think that continuous support from a public institution like EIF is going to be key in the midterm. So I think it's not a rosy picture, but this is what I believe.
Okay, and in the middle of many different risks, we have also one opportunity, which is the European Recovery Plan. And we have funds from the European Union for infrastructure and for research and education. We know that money is arriving for different universities. And I would ask to Matteo if really the recovery plan and this huge amount of funds is an opportunity in the world for entrepreneurial finance.
Yes, I mean, the recovery plan is something that it's going to boost for sure the growth of the diverse type of companies. There are some guidelines attached to it that will be implemented. Some in the near term, some in the long run. But overall, I believe that on a European perspective, there must be a convergence of guidelines that should be implemented. What we've talked about the effect of COVID. COVID has not slowed down investments in VC. Now there is even more money coming in right now from institutional parties. There must be an alignment in Europe as one. in the previous presentation, there was a slide that impacted me. That was the difference in amount of capital deployed in Europe and the amount of capital deployed in the US. And in order to kind of reduce the gap, we need to be allied in Europe as one whole. If you see valuation of company raising a seed round in Italy today, they are not even close to what seed companies in Germany are raising. And this is a crucial factor for companies in Europe as one whole. If the recovery plan wants to tackle this issue in bringing more money to the market, there must be an alignment in what the rounds are structured, in how the rounds are structured, what the companies, the money that the companies are looking for, and what that money should be used upon. And right now we're not seeing that as much, even though there is a good trajectory going into that direction. But it is going to be one of the issues that the recovery plan is going to bring forward in Europe as a whole.
Thank you. So it seems there is a lot of money around. Matteo, were you able to find this money for your startup, your new startup? Can you tell us very briefly something about your new startup and how did you raise money? If it is easy now for an entrepreneur in Europe to find money, and maybe what, to your extent, should be changed in order to improve the process of fundraising for startups?
Yeah, good morning. I would say that from an entrepreneur perspective, to raise funds is becoming tough. I see that in the last months. We have been able to raise a significant amount of money in November last year because basically our business is to provide financing.
Significant? 1 million? 10 million?
23 million. 23 million, which is partially equity, 3 million, and 20 million of debt. Obviously, we provide financing, so we run a revenue-based financing platform. So it's a kind of hybrid solution for digital companies that want to raise growth capital, but don't want to dilute themselves or don't have collaterals for traditional banking solutions. So for us it was easier because we found the right investor, which is basically alternative credit investors. So on the first side, they provide the debit, so the credit facility, and on the other side, they also believed in the company and in the equity of the company. Obviously, to scale these kind of businesses, it's quite capital intensive, so next steps are very, very tough. And I would say that I agree with all the comments I heard today regarding the moment where basically to retain cash is becoming very, very important. Our solution from the other side is something that can help entrepreneurs, especially those in the e-commerce industry, to grow faster, but even if they don't want to be a disruptive company. We have funded pet shops or small e-commerce in the fashion industry. So these kind of businesses are growing very fast, especially after the pandemic. We have found an easier way to raise funds from ourselves because interest rates are getting higher and investors want to see some sort of fixed income. So our solution is a kind of fixed income for them. So currently the outlook, I would see, for our companies and revenue-based financing as a market is quite interesting, but yet innovative.
You have also an equity crowdfunding platform, and there is another new opportunity or threat, you will tell us, that is the new regulation in Europe related to crowdfunding for businesses. Is there something interesting related to this that will change significantly how equity crowdfunding or lending crowdfunding platform works? Is this an opportunity for entrepreneurs?
Well, from my experience, crowdfunding is a very tough industry because it's somehow solve the problems of small companies, but somehow will add extra problems for the future. So it's very important to use crowdfunding in the way it was born, and is basically to raise funds from your stakeholders. I've seen many crowdfunding successful campaigns for big brands like Revolut or other big companies, and these companies used crowdfunding for a marketing purpose, for the engagement of their community. It's a kind of instrument where you can really bond with your customers. It's not just a way to raise funds. So it's difficult to raise huge amount of funds for many companies if they don't have huge communities to back the project. So as long as the new European regulation is coming in, probably we will see more competition, also for the small and few big companies that can use crowdfunding in the proper way. And so it could be a great opportunities for companies, but probably we will see a smaller number of crowdfunding platforms from here to the future.
Thank you. I will ask to Matteo, according to the second Matteo. According to this, there is a strong debate related to integration, segmentation in the markets, financial markets in the European Union. So, to your opinion, Matteo, what is the situation now? The markets for venture capital and angel investing are still segmented. We have different domestic markets in Union, or we can hope that there will be a better integration, even thanks, for example, to the new regulation on crowdfunding.
No, I believe that there is still, of course, a fragmentation, mainly because of language. That is one thing that we still cannot overcome. But that being said, for example, if you look at the business angel outcome, the insurgence of networks of business angel on a European level, I'm thinking about the IBAN, the BIE, is something that in the past years have brought together angel investors from different countries, and therefore facilitating the flow of capital from maybe a French investor onto an Italian startup, or vice versa. And that is for sure a positive outlook in the European market, because this will help companies. If you have a footprint from an investor in one country, it will definitely help the founders move from one country to the other. And I believe that is not only happening at the VC or angel investors, but also in terms of regulatory perspective. If you think about Banca d'Italia, for example, last year released the regulatory sandbox. That is something that in the UK that has been done I think 3 or 4 years prior to Italy. And the fact that we're all starting to applying the same innovative backbone to let founders and new companies try out different innovative trajectories is happening on a European level. And that's for sure something that is still there as a difference between one country to the other, but is coming together. And to me, the outlook is definitely positive in the near future.
Thank you. And another hot topic, or potential hot topic, it's a topic that myself and Vincenzo, we have this project to work on this analysis, that is the relationship between crowdfunding and angel investing. So, Anna, what is the relationship? You're working in an equity crowdfunding platform in which business angels, they have relevant roles because they lead investments. So, can you give us a summary of this experience, positive, negative?
So sure. First of all, we try not to be, not to act as, let's say, a crowdfunding, not to be recognized as a crowdfunding platform, though we use the same legislation. We will try to act as a venture investing platform because we think that this is also a little bit closer to how usually business angels invest. So in short, we're trying to replicate on a bigger scale how we usually as individual business angels invest. So we usually do an important due diligence, like all the other investors, of course. But then we choose the investor. Usually we invest in pre-seed and seed, so very early stage. And we try to put also in Norway let's say the personal touch, the personal involvement of the investors. So we try to build a community of investors, a little bit like we're also doing when we're working with YAG, in Italian Angels for Growth, or Club Deal, or Club degli Investitori in Torino, that are the big associations. So each of us try to find an interesting startups in which bring also his or her knowledge, his or her network, time, let's say the smart money. So for a business angel, it's very important the money that we bring in, but also the smart money, something else that some business angels, and generally speaking, business angels want to bring in the company. And we used to, and this is also what we try to do in Norway, building up our own community and building up it very engaged and strong, so that it can create links among investors and among investors and startups. And also with the Business Angels Association, we also try to invest in group. So let's say each one invests a small amount of money, but we pull together a group of people, so in order to have a bigger investment and also a bigger importance in the startups. And this is something I think that closes ties among business angels, and in a certain way also closes ties with the startups. And this is, I think, is something that is a bit peculiar for business angels, because let's say a bigger amount of money that for sure venture capitalists can bring in, let's say easily, or even bigger. We have to build it with more people inside, and we try to take the best also of the time, of the knowledge, of the network of those people, and we're willing to do this as a business angels in order to, let's say, feel a little bit part of the startups and possibly of its success. And this is what we try to do as individual business angels, and this is what also we try to replicate with Norway, giving the possibility of this kind of investment, but also experience to a larger amount of people, and also, as also my colleagues were saying before, also on an international scale, because we think that the international possibility, innovation, and success and interesting people are all over the world, and we try to have an eye on or at least most of the interesting startups and investments that we can do. And as investors, we all hope, and our community, of course, is open to investors, international investors that want to have a closer look to the Italian market, but also share this philosophy of investing together as business angels, but on a digital platform.
Thank you. And we have people here working also on technology transfer. We know that innovation and technology built in universities can be brought to the market. and with the creation of spin-off companies, startup companies. I'm a bit skeptical about this because I will never tell to an academic teacher to manage a company, or I will never give a company to be managed by a teacher. But actually, there are funds specialized in technology transfer, in patenting activity, innovation at the very first stage of creation. And as I told you before, 360 Capital is a partner also of Politecnico in a fund. So it would be nice to hear from Cesare about this experience. Generally, what do you think about the potential of technology transfer from universities, and then about the experience that you are leading?
Sure, yeah. Yes, that's true. I mean, we started to work with in technology transfer and with the Politecnico of Milan roughly 3 years ago. So, as you know, a fund has a 10-year life, so we are still, let's say, in the first phase. Although I think we can already, you know, we form an idea about this in the past 3 years. So, no, I think the experience has been very positive. I think that there's a lot of potential, you know, innovation that can translate into good companies in universities, and here in Politecnico, but in other universities here in Italy. And by the way, we have Politecnico as our first partner, but we can also invest in other, in spin-offs of other projects in other universities. So the fund is open to the entire Italian territory. No, so far we have built a portfolio of about 12 companies, most of them spin-off of the Politecnico of Milano. Some of them were able to already to finance themselves in later rounds. So we saw some good evolution of our portfolio. We are still building the portfolio, but I would say that the first impression is actually very positive. And to the point on who's managing the company, I have to say that, at least in our view, the fund is more, let's say, focused in finding good potential new entrepreneurs within the university ecosystem, which to us doesn't necessarily mean to have a professor running a company, but more, you know, like either a former student or a researcher, a PhD student who want to you know, quit with the university and enter the business world to actually, you know, promote the formation of the company and you know, going forward be the manager of the company. And on the other hand, having the university through the technology transfer office, the incubator, for example, in case of Politecnico, PolyHub, and the professor's team to support the formation of the company, rather than being, you know, first person, the manager of it. Because we do understand that, you know, professor chose academic career, and again, the goal is not to let them switch from academia to business, but more about finding an environment for other people within the university ecosystem to be willing to become entrepreneurs and managers.
Yes, I agree. And we have some minutes to collect questions from the floor. I would say a couple of them. Massimo usually has questions. Indeed, he has a question.
Okay, thank you. I have a general question to all the speakers, and we have here basically all the pillar of what we call an effective entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? And then I also heard from the speakers that something I find very, very, very important is that the situation concerning seed money is evolving positively, right, in the longer term. And I would like to have the opinion of the speaker about the next step, so the scaling step, which was mentioned by Helmut as one of the key policy challenge right now.
Yeah, scaling is one factor crucial in Italy still. I believe that the fundamental goal for Italian startups that raise funds from initial stage on to later stages is to attract capital from abroad. We have seen recently some companies that are now unicorns that have raised a good amount of capital from tier one venture capital from Europe. And I believe that is the tipping point where to start. To scale a business, we need to attract in Italy money from abroad, not only because it helps moving from one country to the other, but because it brings to the overall ecosystem a positive outlook, meaning that if tier one investors in UK or Germany come to the Italian market to invest in startups, this will attract and echo around the world the fact that Italian companies are ready to scale as well. I don't know if my colleagues agree.
From the entrepreneur perspective, I would say that scaling in Europe it's very, very difficult. Also for the fragmentation of the market. I mean, it's not just raising capital, but it's also deploying and making business development. I'm talking about digital businesses, not like life science or other difficult businesses, but in digital, the fragmentation of the market is crucial and is a real pain for most of the entrepreneurs that want to scale their business. In our case, for example, we have very different regulations in so many countries. I used to have this with crowdfunding, and it took like 7 or 8 years to have a European level regulation. So for a company in financial services, for example, to show a clear European scale, it's not just about raising capital, it's also about business development, and it's not easy if you have such fragmentation. That's my point of view.
No, I mean, I think we need to distinguish a little bit between, let's say, seed stage and business angel and subsequent rounds. So all have been said, I think, is very true for bigger rounds. Of course, it would be nice to have more international investors investing in Italy, and I think if this, let's say, positive VC climate continues for a few years, I think it will happen, because at the end, you know, money will flow more, will spill over from, let's say, the bigger country to the smaller countries, just because teams are going to chase for better trade-off between the potential of an opportunity and the cost of it. And for sure, what was said before on valuations is very, very true. I mean, you can see every day, maybe not in Italy, but of course abroad. For example, we are working a lot in France, so you can really see the valuation went to the roof. And at some point, obviously, teams are going to chase good ideas in countries where valuation might be lower. On the seed stage, again, it's not, you know, my bread and butter, but I'd say that there has been a growth in the interest in venture capital, let's say, in startup investments in the past few years, and I think there is, I'd say, a decent amount of capital available. It's a very local market usually, you know. Let's say business angel investing is very local, so I think that it's going to be harder to attract foreign capital for these very, very early stage investments. But I think what has been built here in the country seems to me fairly, I would say, very good and fairly sufficient for the initial need of any given entrepreneur who wants to raise money either with business angels or very early stage seed funds.
No. I totally agree with with everything that has been said from my colleagues. I would just like to add one thing that I think that for scaling, for sure, it is very important money, and so having the right funds. But also the founders and the startup organization has to understand and to choose that they have to start structuring. And that I think is a shifted mindset that is very important and not easy to make, especially by founders and probably even by some of the first employees. In this sense, I think that the first investors, like business angels, or also the funds, the seed funds that have invested, I think that they have a crucial role to make the founders understand this shift in procedures, in organization, in structuring, in doing better and faster what they're doing, let's say, on a smaller scale, and doing it also with delegating, with everything that relates to structuring a company. And so I think that the first investors can play a very important role in creating this culture, or this awareness in the founders of this shift of perspective activities, and probably helping also the founders to start looking at their startup as something that is going to get bigger, and so that they have to think how they want to get it bigger. And sometimes also put in some, in case, but that it's more from a venture capital fund perspective, suggest the introduction of some managers or some policies that can help structure not the new company, but the bigger company that has to scale well and fast.
Okay, thank you for this round the table. And this was just an appetizer of many different topics, so we have the opportunity to go in detail with them if they are able to stay for the next half an hour, because we have a lunch box outside here from the room. And I'm sure that you will join me in thanking all the contributors, the two Matteos, Cesare and Anna, for joining this session. Thank you.